Welcome to the first episode of Leadership on the Front Foot, where we explore a wide range of leadership topics and interview some of the community's best and brightest leaders. We've established Leadership on the Front Foot to provide different ideas and thinking for our clients, our professional network, and our community. Leadership on the Front Foot is being recorded in front of a live audience, and you are very welcome to pose a question at any time during our time together using the Q&A button down at the bottom of your screen. We'll get to as many of those questions as we can. Now, for those people who have already posed a question around the security of the Zoom webinar platform, I can absolutely assure you that we have taken all security precautions and that this webcast is completely secure. The recording of the Leadership on the Front Foot webcast will be available on our website, on YouTube, and also as a podcast on your favourite podcast platform. So if you like what you hear, don't hesitate to subscribe, and also feel free to share the link with your friends. In this first episode, we're discussing all things cybersecurity, which is a very timely topic because so many businesses have sent people home to work from home. And also individuals being forced to use technology, sometimes for the first time, but also to use them differently. Cybersecurity is a topic that's really close to my heart because in 2018, we at Capital Partners had our own breach event. It was a very innocent move on one of our team members when they clicked on what's known as a phishing email, and everything unfolded from there. Thankfully, there was no harm done. But as anyone in the audience who's ever been hacked will know, it is an awful feeling, not unlike when your home is robbed and ransacked. So to help us unpack this topic, I'm joined today by Brian Smith. He's the founder and CEO of QuadIQ, which is a cybersecurity consulting firm, and also Slipstream Cybersecurity, which is a real-time monitoring firm. Now, when we had our cyber event, I rang around to friends to find someone who could help, and Brian was the name that I was given. And his firm were essentially our first responders. And since then, we've established a very long-term relationship with Brian and his team, and we couldn't be happier. So Brian, welcome to Leadership on the Front Foot.
Can you hear me okay there?
Yep, welcome.
Very good.
Yeah, so Brian, I'd like our audience to get to know you a little better. You were born and raised in Perth. Tell us a little bit about the early years.
Look, really, the start of my journey into this realm started with sort of leaving Perth actually at sort of 18 years of age to join the army, and they promptly put me into university in Canberra, a military university, and I did a Bachelor of Science there in what was the precursor to cybersecurity, if you like. I don't think we had the term cyber back then, and we barely had the internet. But back then we were doing things like encryption and counter encryption. So I started to learn about what would become cyber in that part of my career, and then went on to do a whole heap of different things with those skills. As I went through a military career, and then I went into the Commonwealth and did a whole range of things. Was a diplomat for a while, and worked in counter-terrorism and government policy around security, and I've seen this from a whole range of different angles, if you like. And then, in the last decade or so, I've gone and headed up the cybersecurity function for a large Australian multinational corporation. And then set up QuadIQ and Slipstream Cyber.
It must be amazing looking back on how far the internet has come since the early 90s. I suspect you could never have known what was going to emerge.
Yeah, look, I mean, I remember vividly one of the last lectures I had at university was a lecturer who got up and actually introduced the internet. And said there's things coming and it's going to be pretty important. That's
an understatement.
Yeah, I mean, it's a staggering phenomenon how it's penetrated our daily life, and the fact that we're doing what we're doing now to most people who are sitting at home, and people around the world are doing it. It's just astonishing. You know, I had a teleconference with someone in Canada this morning, and you know, the connectivity that we have as a result of the internet is just breathtaking. It really has changed our lives.
Yeah, it's made the world a much smaller place, hasn't it?
It has, in a good and a bad way. You know, and that's the exact phenomenon that we're dealing with, is that people can do you harm from anywhere in the world. You know, my firm is engaged in incident response. So we've got clients, we've got a dozen incidents running simultaneously at the moment. You know, I got an update about an hour ago. We're helping a medical practice in New South Wales who's under a sustained attack from someone in Romania today. So, yeah, it's made the world a very small place.
Yeah. Brian, before we move on from your military career, I'd really love to understand what are the experiences that you've had during that career that have shaped your career in cybersecurity. And I wonder, as part of the answer, if you could draw out any parallels between those experiences and where we find ourselves today in amongst this COVID-19 crisis.
Sure. So, oh, look, I mean, people that have been in those those service roles, whether it's the military or the, you know, the sort of many others, and you know, today, of course, it's the medical profession and the teaching profession that are sort of sitting at the front line of this particular crisis. But I think for anyone in those roles that's been in those service professions, where I guess you build a sense of duty and a culture of helping to protect people, and an enthusiasm for it, and probably coming with that is an enthusiasm for risk. Pretty much all we do in our business is deal with risk. We deal with threats and risk, and we're very familiar with it. And that, you know, I've learnt that over my whole career. You know, so coming up 30 years, I suppose, been dealing with risk, and you know, those skills, that perspective of being able to understand the, you know, the likelihood and consequences of events, make a calculation about how much effort you afford to put into dealing with it, and then go about it in a disciplined sort of a way, are pretty good skills that I've learnt over many decades that are pretty valuable at the moment. You know, I think over things that have happened in my career, and David, we were discussing a few things that have happened in my career. I was in Washington, DC in the immediate aftermath of 9/11. And I remember some great parallels to the current crisis in that there was a great deal of fear and panic and uncertainty. You know, the American population in particular went into lockdown very similar to what we're experiencing at the moment. And was dealing with a different set of circumstances, but the response was the same. There was panic buying and all sorts of things. But there was a couple of things that struck me about the two experiences, is that I was astonished at how quickly even a big society with sort of terrible things happening can normalise and right itself. And it's another way of saying this too will pass, but economies and societies can have great resilience that sometimes isn't apparent in the midst of the crisis. So, and I think that's definitely the case. And I think we're starting to see sort of green shoots now, which is pleasing to see. And probably the other thing I've learned is doesn't matter how stressful the situation is, but you've always got a minute to think. And I mean that in a practical sense. Is in most cases you can make some big decisions, but you often make them very, very quickly and without actually stopping to think. And this is one of those occasions where I'm sort of reminded of a minute is a long time, and it pays to take it and check your emotions before making your decisions, and do them soberly.
Yeah. You mentioned Romania earlier and the medical centre that's under pressure.
Yeah.
And you also talked about this idea of protecting others. You know, I think we all have a view of ourselves as we're the good guys. Who actually are the bad guys that people like you are trying to protect us from?
Yeah, look, it's a rich and diverse field. I mean, at the one end, it starts with the juvenile hackers, or the script kiddies, or the bored kids at home, and there's a few at the moment who start to try their hand at breaking things or even just investigating things, and then they get themselves into trouble. There's cases from time to time. It's been a couple of years since I've seen a high-profile prosecution of a young person for hacking, but they do happen in Australia, and there's even been a couple in Perth. So that's where it starts. Then it really moves up into the criminal gangs doing it, and organised crime. It's a very substantial money earner for organised crime, and it's a very sophisticated market for organised crime. And they pursue it as they will pursue weaknesses in any other part of society. And they do it very well, and they're very well funded, and they're very persistent. And then it's right up to state-sponsored. And, we're particularly seeing this at the moment, but, even in a geopolitical sense, you're seeing, the American military being challenged around the world in places like the Gulf and the South China Sea to test them, knowing that they're under stress, and the exact same things happening in cyberspace. The state actors that use cyber espionage to further their position are doing so actively. And this is not just a COVID-19 thing. This is happening all day, every day. And we often talk about the example of North Korea, for instance, which is alleged to fund itself to the tune of over $2 billion a year by hacking small businesses in the West to relieve its sanction situation. So, you're up against a whole range of threats, and it's asymmetric, i.e. the big threat actors don't necessarily just go after the big, well-defended targets in the same way as the small, backyard operations don't go after similarly small targets. They'll go after anybody. So that asymmetry is a feature of the internet, and it allows anybody to have a go at doing anything against anyone else.
So do you think that allegation that rogue states like North Korea and other rogue states that have, sanctions imposed on them, do you think that's true, that they are actively raising hard currency that way?
Look, I think without a doubt, I think states, not just North Korea, but states, many and varied, are using cyber warfare to advance their interests, and whether it's raising capital or doing, stealing intellectual property, or furthering their strategic aims, absolutely states are doing it. I mean, the Australian government has admitted to doing it 4 or 5 years ago. To having an offensive cyber warfare capability that they are using. So I think without a doubt that's happening, and stealing money off people, absolutely within the realms of possibility.
It's amazing. And I'm really interested, I could see why a financial services firm would be targeted in an attack. But why would a medical practice be? Is it just money that they're after?
It's probably two things. Definitely money and personal information. So, medical practice or a law firm similarly will hold vast amounts of very sensitive information about people, and there's a market for that. So there's a very thriving black market that operates mainly on the dark web, where this information is traded. Mm-hmm. So any identity information that you can get your hands on, it has some value to someone somewhere, and it might be just to perpetuate yet another attack, or to monetize in some way.
Okay, well look, I'm going to go straight to a question that was put to us in the registration process. This is from Angus, and I'll paraphrase. Can you see a time in the future where individuals will have to buy back their privacy? There's so much information online, and will there be a time where we have to pay to be able to restrict the information that's available online?
Mm. Definitely. Well, I think it's already started, and the way a lot of vendors are doing it is by having premium features for their products. And it is in those premium features that you get the protections that you need. And you know, it's the old age, you be careful what you pay for, and particularly be very careful what you don't pay for. So things that are free, generally, and there's plenty of free things on the internet, we're using a free platform here. But as a general rule, they come with lower levels of security and privacy protection. And it's particularly prevalent in the enterprise space. So if you're buying software, if you want the full protection, the full level of encryption, the full level of access control, the full level of logging, those things cost extra. And so it's kind of a reverse from what Angus is saying, is you have to pay to keep your privacy. But I think definitely when you're buying software as a service, like something like Zoom, often paying extra will get you better security features. I think moving to more of the sort of can you pay? Well, you definitely can pay at the moment, for instance, to exercise your rights under European law. So the Europeans have a piece of legislation called the General Data Protection Requirements, or GDPR. They allow you to exercise what they call your right to be forgotten. So you can contact vendors like Google and say, I'd like you to forget me. i.e. I'd like you to delete all your records that you've accumulated about me, and they have to respond to that. Now, that's not easy. You've got a lot of people to potentially communicate to, and you can now start paying people to do that for you. There's firms that specialise in taking people or organisations custom to actually go out and have them forgotten. So it's starting in a couple of ways.
So there you go, Angus. The future is here already. I think this next question, I want to go into some of the risks that consumers face. You touched on that a moment ago, but we are all customers and clients of organisations. And I know that 18 months, 2 years ago, I thought that good cybersecurity was having a good spam filter and a what do they call it? That thing in the server room, the firewall. Yeah. So, and I thought that was enough, but my own experience tells me that it's nowhere near enough. So important question. What are good businesses doing to protect themselves from this risk and to protect their customers, the payment gateways, their private information?
I think the first thing is it's not a one-off task, and I think we see too many organisations treat it as something to be sort of momentarily dealt with. We've fixed our cybersecurity, we've moved on. The good enterprises are dealing with it not just in an ongoing way, but 24/7 as well. But they certainly see this as a journey. The threat is changing all the time, and your environment is changing all the time, and it does take a lot of effort to keep your security up to date. For instance, in the last 2 weeks, Chrome browser, Microsoft Office Suite, and Apple have all released critical patches for their software, which, if not patched, would open up people to some serious risk. Now, a lot of businesses don't even know that those updates have come out and that they have to do something about it. So, this happens all the time. So, being prepared to invest in it continuously over the long term. The really sophisticated organisations are getting someone like a Slipstream to help them. We look after our clients 24/7. We look over their shoulder to make sure that threats are not evolving, or that vulnerabilities are not evolving in their environment, and they're dealt with quickly. And that, probably the other thing that organisations really are doing is taking their regulatory responsibilities very seriously. So they're understanding their exposure to things like the Privacy Act. They understand the regulations in their vertical, whether it's health or financial services, or whether it's banking regulations, whatever it might be. Understanding what your regulations are.
So when you say you look after and I'm not trying to give an ad for you, I really am not. even though it might sound like it. But when you say you look after your clients 24/7, what does that actually mean? Because I think that's a very important piece of the puzzle.
Yeah. So, you know, we and other vendors in this space, what we do is we get all the telemetry, we call it, but all the data out of your environment. So this is not your emails and, you know, your documents, but your metadata, if you like, about what network traffic is going through your environment, whether it's your cloud services you've got or your on-premise networks or your devices sitting on your desk, to look at what those devices are doing and seeing whether they are being targeted, or whether a hacker is in there and is actually using them, or is about to launch a ransomware attack, is stealing information, or is sitting silently in your environment waiting for a banking transaction to go through, or is trying to deceive you into thinking that there's someone else and manipulate payments and contracts and other things. So
if you see someone trying to log into, say, our network from Romania,
yeah,
that's going to be a very, very, very quick response.
Yeah, that's right. And we have quite a bit of technology that sits underneath to help us do that. Some very clever technology, but essentially what that's there for is to filter out all the noise, because, you know, 99% of your network traffic will be benign, and to tell us that 1% that this is unusual behaviour, and we need to do something about it. And so there's a short-term fix, which may be to, you know, shut down a machine or block a port on your firewall or delete an email. But there's also an important role of helping coach you and your business over a longer term to sort of deal with this change that goes on in your environment with the threat, so that you're always keeping up, so you don't find yourself sort of hopelessly behind the game come the day at the races.
Yeah, sure. Now, I do want to move more into the consumer space, but I've got a really great question from Alex. Can Brian please give us a brief explanation of the dark web?
Right. Okay. So the dark web is really just like the real web, but it's not visible, and it's not indexed. And so what that means is, what the search engines do is they basically go around all these computers that are connected globally to form the World Wide Web, and they recognise them and they put them into a sort of a phone book so that you can find them. And that's how your browser works. The dark web, on the other hand, is just the same. It's just computers connected to this worldwide network, but they haven't been indexed, so they haven't been put in the phone book. So you kind of can't look up where to go to find them. You have to know exactly where you need to go. There's some tools to help you navigate it, but essentially you just need to know exactly where you're going. And you can go to that place. It's unfortunately, it's not an inaccessible place. It's often talked about as if you need some special skills and special abilities to go there, as if you're going to another planet. No, it's very easy to get to the dark web. You know, it is difficult for people like law enforcement to investigate it, and it's very hard to regulate, because you don't have big corporates like Google who will play by the rules mainly, and help regulating the open web. But it's very similar in every respect.
Okay, so moving to the more consumer end of the conversation, I suspect it would be really easy for people to take the view, look, there are X billion people on the planet. What are the chances of it's going to be me? You know, and I wonder sometimes whether people only really react when they've had an issue. What are the key risks we face as individual consumers?
Okay, so look, the premise that it's very, very low risk for me as an individual, because there's, you know, billions of people in the world and this is only affecting a small chunk of them, is you know, and sadly is simply just not the case. It is very unlikely now to have anybody who hasn't had some of their data breached in one way or another. So there are literally billions of breached accounts sitting on the dark web, many more than people in the world, and they that, you know, it represents sort of the statistical reality that, you know, you as an individual are going to get targeted at some point. But what are the key risks? I mean, really, losing your privacy and having suffer identity fraud is really the main issue that happens to the individual. And to give you an idea of how individuals get caught up in it, a lot of these corporate cyber attacks we see that involve monetary fraud, to get the money laundered out of Australia, they have to attack an individual's identity and breach their bank account. So they have to, some poor unsuspecting individual gets breached so that, $500,000 can get laundered out of their account and sent overseas. And that's how you get drawn into it. And so we see quite a bit of individuals getting caught up in a much bigger scam, but they're used as a pawn, if you like, and that's why they're targeted. So identity fraud and banking fraud is key areas that hit individuals. Losing your identity documents doesn't, it might sound trivial, but it is a real pain. It's a real pain in the neck to have to go and change your identity documents or to get on the wrong end of one of these consistent frauds. And you might have your identity sold online, and it might get sold 10 times to 10 different threat actors who might keep coming back at you over months or even years. So, it can have a really profound effect on people. So really, they're the main things. We see with individuals occasionally getting caught up in things like ransomware, where they're getting a ransom demanded of them. But more often than not, it's petty frauds. Where individuals getting sort of sucked into situations where they're being either extorted for money or tricked out of their money. I think we just lost you there, David.
I did mute because there's a guy with a whippersnapper. Everywhere I go in the last month, I've been followed by a man or person with a whippersnapper. Whether it's in my front garden or back garden, there's a whippersnapper everywhere, and there's now one in the park across the road. Sorry about that. So when we look at this risk, though, I get that most individuals probably aren't going to be a ransomware target. That's going to be more about business. They're going to go for a bigger target. Mm-hmm. But trying to get money out of your bank account by saying, well, we've got this information about you and we're going to ransom you, for $20,000, that's still a lot of money. But how does that all come together? Like, how does that information, I assume the password information and that sort of thing, when you say it gets sold, it probably gets sold on the dark web. Mm-hmm. But how does it play out?
So I'll give you an example. I'll give you a specific example of a case, and I've got lots of these, so this is quite common. So someone has their browser hacked. So the hacker gets in via a suspicious, email, a phishing email. They click on the link. It installs something in a plugin into their browser that sits and looks for their banking information. The next time they get onto their bank website, it redirects some of that information to the attacker. They can then get in there and do things in the bank account. So they get their credentials into the bank account, and then they use that to set up a business. So they'll go online and then they set up a business, a completely legitimate but online established business that has a bank account in Australia, has a domain name, and then they use that to launch a attack at against a bigger target. And they look for that target to misdirect some funds, for instance, because they've done the same thing. They've hacked their email. They're reading their emails. They're starting to get inside the transaction, and then the money gets sent to the first victim's bank account, and the hacker gets in there and sends that money and all the rest of the first victim's money, by the way, out of the country in a single SWIFT transaction. So. And that's one example. There's many other things about how it sort of comes together, but this is how it starts. And it starts with that, those phishing emails or that spam-looking stuff that comes into your inbox, and then it can culminate into some serious financial loss.
So let's talk about phishing emails. On my phone, which is on silent, but it's right here, in case I get a note from Rachel telling me I've done something wrong. The email's just come into my account and it says Capital Partners VoIP. Now, Cynthia and a phone number has left you a message. It's 23 seconds long. Now, I know that that's spam, so I just get rid of it. But tell us what's a phishing email?
So what the attackers are doing is using the psychology of people, or social engineering people is the term that we use, is to trick you into thinking that's a legitimate email and that you might want to click on it. And I'll talk in a moment about COVID-19 phishing, but the premise is this looks like a legitimate email. We've been, we're sort of, modern humans are acculturated or trained into just ploughing through email and instant messaging and social media. We're taught to automatically sort of click through and deal with these messages, as that's what we do with most of our life. And so they rely on that automatic response to just get you to click on the link, and that will take you to a place on the internet or download some malware directly, or take you to a place on the internet that will bring down malware, or it will trick you into providing your credentials. So the next click, I can assure you, if you clicked on that link, it would say, put in your Office 365 password to access your voicemail. And if you didn't know better, which you definitely do, but if you didn't know better, you'd give your password away, and then within about 10 minutes after that, they'd be in your account.
It's extraordinary.
Yeah.
It's really extraordinary, isn't it? And funny, just come up on the Q&A, a friend of mine, Diane, who's on the call or on this webinar, has just said, you won't believe it, I just got that same Cynthia email. So they must just broadcast these to thousands and thousands of people at a time.
Oh, absolutely. It's done on an industrialized scale. So, I mean, they have to set up servers, and they would send this. So that same email would go to millions of people potentially, and in different forms, because that's what you can do with computers. You can automate and do things at very large scales. And so they will, and they'll get a percentage of people who will click on it. And even if that percentage is very low, and unfortunately the percentage isn't that low, but even if it was very low, they would still get thousands of people falling victim to that attack.
Mm.
It's why it's $1 trillion industry.
Yeah. And I'm really conscious. I think we need to really dig into a bit more of the detail here, because within our client base and community, there are obviously people with vastly differing technology backgrounds and experiences. So when you think about this, and I think everyone recognizes spam now, but I guess that's the first line of defense, is your personal response to your personal responsibility, if you will, around how you interact online. Yeah. And I think within our email accounts, we're aware of that. Can you just take us now to the internet in general, news sites, and where are the other risks that we need to be aware of? Yeah,
well, I mean, look, the thing is, the vast majority of the internet is places you shouldn't go, is the reality, for a whole heap of reasons. But the percentage of the total internet that is safe and usable and useful and reliable is actually quite small, I think. So I think it's really important to isolate the safe places that you need to go and you want to go, and to recognise them. And we're saying to a lot of people at the moment, there are literally now hundreds of thousands of fake COVID-19 websites being established. Hundreds of thousands of them. We're in some organisations where these things are shared between companies like us and government, and there's huge updates coming through every day of extra ones that have been spun up. So there's great swathes of the internet you shouldn't go, but where should you go? You should go to the State Department of Health or the Commonwealth Department of Health, if that's where you want reliable information. Not only will you'll avoid fake news, but you will avoid going to a place where the purpose of that site is to download malware onto your computer, which is the purpose of most of those COVID-19 sites that have spun up. So just, being particularly aware of where you browse. So you have to be as conscious of your browsing behavior as you do of your email and your clicking through email behavior. because you can end up in some very dodgy places.
What about news sites, Brian? You know, you're just reading stuff about whatever, an area of interest, and you click, and you click again, and then you click again.
Yeah.
It all looks legit. I think you can tell when you're on a page and you think, oh my goodness, this is just rubbish. You know,
Yeah.
You know, Meghan Markle sues the Queen for $10 billion. You know,
Yeah.
Okay, no, that's probably not true. But how do you distinguish that?
Yeah, and look, it's tough, right? Because a lot of the news sites will embed third-party advertising and in their sites. So, and that might take you to some interesting places. And if you've been on YouTube, for instance, that's a classic. You know, the embedded advertising that comes up in YouTube, you're only 2 clicks away from absolutely dreadfully risky parts of the internet on something like YouTube, even though it's a very mainstream platform. So, and even though, you know, YouTube itself isn't the threat actor, they're certainly allowing advertisers in that might be 1 or 2 sort of degrees of separation away from people that are. So you have to be very careful where the internet sort of takes you, and you know, being conscious that you know, the way these things are built, whether it's for advertising purposes or for cyber attack, they're designed to draw you in slowly and to lower your defences gradually before they deceive you. They don't want to be obvious.
So they're actually taking you through a lead nurture process, almost trying to help create some confidence and trust, and then they have a go.
Yeah, absolutely.
Amazing. Okay, so I think we've looked at the risks pretty well. How do we protect ourselves at home? What's the best thing we can do to protect ourselves at home?
Yeah. Okay. There's a couple of really, really good things you can do, and here I'll get a little bit technical. But multi-factor authentication, or second factor of authentication, which is like another password. Most of your email and a lot of your social media platforms like Facebook will have that now. You're probably used to it with your banking. Most of your banking transactions require a sort of a second factor where you've got to either put in a code or you've got to click on an app at the moment of authorizing it. Or after you've put your password in, you've got to respond to an SMS message that might get you to put in a code. So that's all bundled together, and it's called multi-factor authentication. Consider it an extra password. I saw some statistics from Microsoft yesterday, actually, that said they've been tracking breaches of Microsoft accounts over a period of time, and they now think 99.9% of all data breaches against Microsoft clients occur because they didn't have multi-factor authentication enabled. So it's a very effective, another way of looking at it, it's a very effective control. So if the app or the site you're using has multi-factor authentication, or MFA, or 2FA, it's sometimes called second factor of authentication, use it. The next thing I would say is, if this is in addition to being very careful about what you click on and being very phishing aware, and, you know, immediately deleting phishing emails if you see them. The next thing I would say is really maintain the computers that you're working on. So patch your operating systems, patch your software, patch your browsers. That's a little bit technical, but I encourage people, it's not that hard to find out how to do it. And that can vastly reduce the number of risks that you face. They're probably the sort of handful of things I would say, in addition to sort of some general housekeeping. Get a good antivirus platform, use it. Get in the habit of using a password manager. People who reuse passwords, they might use the same password on their internet banking as they use on their Facebook account, as they use on some other sort of platform that they're on, just because that's convenient and that's easy. That's incredibly dangerous, because if you're reusing your password and your some application that you've reused it on hasn't got as good security as your bank, but it's the same password, they get breached. Guess what? The hackers has got the password to your bank account. And we see that happen a lot. So get what we call a password manager and use it. you know, I'm a stickler for this. I don't reuse a password on any site. And I looked up and counted the other day. I've got something like 157 passwords, separate passwords for things. So, you know, it doesn't take you long to accumulate too many passwords to remember. So use one of these apps to help you do that.
Okay, so just give us a little bit more on how these apps work. What are they? What do they do? How do they work?
Yeah. So some of them have some different features, but basically think of it just as a digital notebook where you can readily store securely all these different passwords, and it has a master password for you to get into, and it'll also take a biometric, so you can use your thumbprint to get into it quickly. But every time you create an account, so you might decide, I'm stuck at home, I'm going to start, you know, internet shopping on a new site. They've asked me to create an account. You, at the same time as you're signing into this new account and putting in credentials, creating a password, you're also putting that detail into the app, which sits on your phone or on your desktop. You save it into the app, and then it's there for you for reference in the future. When you close that app, that book of passwords is locked, and if a hacker gets into your machine, they wouldn't necessarily be able to get into it. And then when you come back to that site, you've got to go back to your app to get your password.
And Brian, that's a question I get asked at home is, but what if LastPass gets hacked?
Then you're in trouble.
Yeah.
Then you're in trouble. But you've got to think about it in sort of a bit of a totem pole of risk here. It's much more likely that you'll get that you'll get breached by reusing passwords than an organisation like LastPass or 1Password or one of these organisations that has dedicated itself to protecting people's passwords. That's their business. They've invested heavily in it. They've been held up to great scrutiny. They get people are attempting to hack them all day, every day. And in the main, they're successful at it. So, yeah, definitely it is a risk. It's a pretty small risk compared to the risks that you're avoiding.
Yeah. Okay. Another question from our audience. I will paraphrase this a little bit. There's part of the question is about, do you really know whether the premium features are worth it? You know, do they even work? Well, I think we can safely assume that the paid version is going to be a lot better than the free version. You know.
Yeah, I mean, of course, not always, and you don't always know. I mean, there are things that you can do to check under the hood. You can go looking for certifications that the organisation might have and check them independently. You know, there are you know, things like ISO certifications, and you know, American accounting standards have a set of certifications, particularly for the American companies, which, you know, the vendor might attest to, and then you can, if you're really interested, you can then go and have a look. You can go and have a look at one of the certification bodies and see whether, you know, that organisation actually does have you know, ISO certification, for instance. So you can check, and then, you know, there's the court of public opinion as well. If you for a lot of these things, if you Google them, and Zoom's a classic example, right? Zoom got beaten up in the press quite roundly about a month ago. But if you actually got on the internet for a little while and you did some reliable reading into it, you start to get a bit of a better idea of what the real story is with their security. And, you know, and of course, then you find the truth is, well, the free version, the security, you know, going back a month was quite poor. But it just meant that there was a few features you had to enable. You had to avail yourself of a few features in order to make it much more secure.
Yeah, age-old rule of you know, nothing worth having is free.
Yeah,
it's a general rule. The other part, this was more of a statement from Chris, but I think there's a good question in it because I'm aware of this being a topic of conversation. Is it true that the Mac OS, you know, the Apple operating systems are much more secure than PC based ones, and therefore you really don't need a you know, a protection system as well as your Mac operating system?
Yeah, look, the answer to that is that no, they're not inherently more secure. It's a matter of statistics. I think you know, Microsoft and PC-based technology makes up something like 90% of the market. I can't remember the statistics. So statistically speaking, there's a lot more vulnerabilities in the PC market than there is in the Apple market. Okay. Because there's more of it and there's more of them. And so there's a perception that they're more secure. Look, I mean, Apple will tell you there's certain things about their system that makes it more secure, but they certainly don't recommend you go without things like antivirus. So even if you've got a Mac, you know, you simply must have antivirus on there. And it, you know, if it has a sobering effect, the case I was just talking about the medical practice that's been hacked from Romania, they're all on Macs, and the attacker got some malware into their environment. So it definitely does happen.
So can you just reel off a couple of names? Well, you might choose not to. Is it possible for you to reel off a couple of names of the sort of you know, virusware players and products that are worth putting on our shopping list? Oh
yeah, look, in the consumer space, I'm happy to recommend a couple. Bitdefender is one, which is very powerful. It consistently sort of performs very well, and is quite cost effective as well. So definitely Bitdefender antivirus is quite good. Trend Micro is quite good as well. But really, look, in the malware, antivirus and anti-malware space, you know, it's you get what you pay for. If you're in a real hurry and you're on a Microsoft system, enable Windows Defender. Make sure that's working, which is the inbuilt antivirus in Microsoft. It's got a bad reputation, but it's getting better. And you just have to make sure that's switched on.
Yeah. Okay. A couple of other quick ones on the chat, on the Q&A. Questions around social media sites. You know, you talk about two-factor authentication.
Yeah.
You know, we understand two-factor authentication for our bank accounts. Sure, everyone gets that. But where is two-factor authentication available? Is it everywhere?
Yeah, look, I think you'll find it's on a lot of sites. So it's certainly available on things like Facebook and LinkedIn. You know, it is becoming a de facto standard, security standard for a lot of these platforms. And, you know, look, it's really important. We've helped a client who is a widely recognised athlete who had their Facebook page hacked, basically, and they were, you know, their social media profile was very important to their overall sort of brand, and they suffered some very serious damage because someone got into their Facebook profile and started to purport to be them, saying some ridiculous things, and so they suffered some serious brand damage. So, you know, even though you might not think, why do I need multi-factor authentication on my Facebook page? Well, you know, bad things can happen.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
For sure. So the key things I've picked up on there are you've got to make sure you've got an antivirus program running and not a free one. This is tough, isn't it? Because everywhere you look, there's a monthly license fee on just about everything we do these days. It's a great business for the computer software companies.
Yeah.
But Bitdefender and Trend Micro are good. There's a question here about malware bytes. Is that any good?
Yeah. Look, yeah, that'd be on the list. It's a good product.
Okay, great. There you go, Chris. There's one for free. Yeah. And so the other things were two-factor authentication on everything that you can possibly get it on.
Yeah.
Yep. Be very, very careful about what you click on.
Yep.
What do you do if you do think you've clicked on something that's awful?
Right. Okay. Well, you probably your first port of call is to make sure that your antivirus is running effectively and that it's up to date. That's probably the first thing that I do. If you've entered your password, if it's tricked you into entering a password, then you need to immediately change your password. If you haven't got multi-factor on at this stage, you must get it on. Then if you've done that, you need to make sure you terminate any of your sessions. So can get a bit tricky at this stage, but you've got to make sure that you've actually logged out of everything, and then you're logging back in with your new password, because you want to make sure that the attacker, if they've managed to get your password, is logged out, and then they can't get back in because they don't have the right password.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's just go through the list then. Maintain your systems. So make sure you're regularly patching your operating system and patching your browsers.
Yep.
Is there anything I've missed?
No, that's it.
Okay. I've got one more question that I actually think is a ripper. From Chris. Thanks, Chris. What is the issue with connecting your phone or your computer to the public Wi-Fi, just like in an airport?
Okay. So essentially, there's a couple of risks that you take, but the way a lot of applications work is they assume you're on a trusted network, and so they're putting data, or they're allowing data to sort of to pass unencrypted from your device out to the internet, and that last sort of mile link, that you might be on. So the Wi-Fi at the Qantas Club, or not that anyone can go there anymore, but those sort of places, that data is visible to everybody else in that network, potentially, because that data is just moving around in the network. So it's available to anyone who's also on that network before it goes out to the internet. So that's part one. There's some risks associated with how authentication happens. So when you're logging into a site, if you're doing so on an unsecure connection, it can pick up certain artifacts of your login credentials, for instance. And then, of course, there's a range of attacks that can happen where people pretend to be the Wi-Fi host. So this is sort of turning up to if the Wi-Fi site is say the Qantas Club. There's nothing stopping someone pulling out a wireless Wi-Fi hub called the Qantas Club and sitting in the Qantas Club and getting everyone to connect to it. And if you do that, then all your data is going to them. Wow.
Okay. So the alternative is then you use a hotspot on your phone, or?
Yeah, generally, if you can use phone-based data, absolutely do. The other way around it is to use a thing called a virtual private network, or VPN service, which encrypts all your traffic from your device.
I've got one of them, thanks outwards.
To you. Yeah.
Another quick question from Jeff. This is another virus one. Is Norton any good? Is Norton okay?
Yeah, look, Norton's okay. There's some interesting things going on with the Semantic brand and the company that sits behind it. But so a few people are sort of getting off it. But yeah, I've put it in the same category as the others.
Well, Brian, that's been fantastic. A real deep dive into cybersecurity. As we wrap up our time together, I'd really love for you, because our webcast is called Leadership on the Front Foot. I'd love just for you to share a couple of ideas, a couple of messages around, what are the things that you think from a leadership perspective are the most important things for us to be thinking of in a time like this, where everyone's a bit topsy-turvy and we're all feeling it a bit. It's a very, very unusual time. What are the key messages that you'd leave us with?
Look, I mean, to reiterate what I said before is I think maintaining a sense that things will get better, and being conscious of positioning yourselves and your organisations or your families to sort of emerge from these times stronger. There's a lot of people who talk about the slingshot effect of these sort of crises situations where if you can think forward and you can project forward to when this will end, and you can start to think positively about what you might do to thrive and adapt and survive on the other side of it. But you have to start those things now. You have to think about those now, and look, I mean, the only other thing that's probably is a recurring theme for me is a much softer sort of concept about sort of exercising kindness. towards everybody that you can. As things get hard as a society and as a globe, just being decent and kind to each other actually pays off.
That's a really beautiful note to finish off on, Brian. Thank you so much. And I think we'll all remember the one too about, if you've got to make a big decision, make sure you take a minute.
Yep.
I think that's really lovely and wise advice. So thank you very much. Well, ladies and gentlemen, you can't, unfortunately, give Brian a big round of applause. So it's up to me to say thank you to you, Brian, and I owe you a nice lunch when this is all over. There is absolutely no question that our audience will have enjoyed your wisdom and your technical expertise. And I have just a comment for the business owners out there. If you have not done a review of your cybersecurity, it is only a matter of time before you get hacked, and the experience is awful. We were lucky we had insurance, so it all got covered, but gee, it would have been an expensive exercise had we not had that. Have a cybersecurity plan, and again, Brian, our thanks. So thank you for joining us today. You've been listening to Leadership on the Front Foot, and it's all about exploring topics that are of interest to our community. We look forward to you joining us again another time. Thank you very much. Our next webcast will be in 2 weeks, and we'll be speaking with a very, very experienced clinical psychologist who will be taking us through some strategies of how we should be thinking about the world as it is today, and how can we make the most of this current environment that we're in. Thanks for joining us.